Okay, let's give this YouTube Live business a second to get started here. All right. So, recently, one of the things I've been working on, well, I mean, I've been doing it forever, but just recently looking at how to try to optimize the build for the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. UC just passed recently. I had quite a few questions on build stuff and whatnot, so I figured, you know what, I'm going to dive back in, take another look at it, and see how I could get a very basic app built and what it would look like to kind of try to optimize that build output, right? So a couple caveats. One is that I'm using this very basic build. You can find the same application on the JSAPI resources repo for the JavaScript API on GitHub. So I use the same app because it does some cool stuff. It has a .density renderer, bookmarks. It's got an expand widget, feature layer, map view. Uses a web map. So this is kind of a typical what someone might use an app along maybe some other stuff they want to do, right? Another caveat is that I'm not trying to focus on making a PWA style app, which would be even more optimized. So with the PWA style app, I'd recommend that users, if they can, defer loading the map as the page loads. So maybe you have some kind of intro page, or not really intro page, but maybe you've got some other page with other information, maybe a list of locations that you show in a list, and a user clicks on those and then they're directed to a map or something, or other information, whether they want to maybe kind of map they want to see, right? So you've got something that's going to lead them into a map, but the map is the first thing they get. I would recommend that style application for PWAs because you can really optimize page load and render times and stuff like that much easier than you could with the map directly loading, because it's going to take some time to download the data, render the map, and so on and so forth. All right. So, okay. So let's start off with those caveats. And one more. I stuck with two build tools. Webpack, because it's pretty much the most popular, and Vite.js. And Vite is cool because Vite is ESM first. So for development purposes, if you're concerned about build times as you're running dev watch mode, Vite just can't be beat, right? It's going to work great. It can use ES build, but I'll talk about that in a second when I show Vite.js do the builds and stuff like that. So it can use ES build as well, which is really nice. I did not use Snowpack because there's currently an open issue with Snowpack, and it's not just impacting the ArcGIS JavaScript API, but it's impacting other libraries as well. So that's why I'm not using Snowpack, and that's pretty much it. I did not use Rollup because Vite actually does use Rollup under the hood, and it's faster. I don't know if it's faster, but it's easier to use. So those are the two caveats, and I'll show you kind of how I got these builds down to the best I could probably get them. All right, so I am using ArcGIS Core. Here's the basic app. This JavaScript file looks the same between them both. I also didn't do TypeScript, so it's not really going to impact it too much in terms of build size or anything like that. If you use TypeScript, it won't have much of an impact. So first thing, let's go ahead and look at what I'm doing in my Webpack config, right? So in the Webpack config, I'm not using CSS minimizer, or I'm not using the Webpack one anymore, so I can actually remove these. The only things I'm using, I have the HTML Webpack plugin, mini CSS extract plugin for CSS stuff, which doesn't really impact the JavaScript API because I'm allowing it to just load the CSS from the CDN. I'm not messing with copying local assets. That's a different story. If you want to copy assets locally, there's different things you would want to do other than what I'm going to show you today. But we're just going to stick with the very basics for today. Also notice I'm bringing in the ArcGIS Webpack plugin. You may have heard me say before that with the ESM build of the JavaScript API, you don't need the Webpack plugin, and you don't. I brought it in because it is going to help me do a couple of things, and I'll show you what in a minute here. So first thing you might notice is I don't have an optimizer section. I went back and forth on adding an optimizer section based on the Webpack documentation and looking over a bunch of other things that people were talking about. So if I come over here and I look at oh my god, I can't even talk. Optimization, right? There's a lot of different options you can go with in here. You can actually modify the cursor plugin to do stuff. if you want and everything. I found it didn't really have much of an impact at the end of the day with the loaded build size or the deployed build size. So the difference there is that the amount of JavaScript that's going to get loaded when the app runs versus the amount of JavaScript you need to deploy for your application. It's not actually all JavaScript either. There's probably some CSS and other files as well that I was counting, but between, I'll show you that in a second with these apps, what I mean with that. But yeah, so there's that. I didn't mess with the optimizer stuff because, like I said, it didn't impact. At the end of the day, once I make these other tweaks, I had no difference at all. I'm using Babel Loader to handle loading the JavaScript API. And for that, with Babel, actually, I don't even have a Babel RC in here. I think I forgot to copy my Babel RC. Oh, that sucks. Okay, so I need to have a Babel RC file. Give me a second here. Ha! That was my bad. I should have copied that Babel RC. You know what it was is that when I copied it over, it wasn't a it was a dot file, so I need to add it in my Webpack here. New file dot Babel RC, and I need just a very basic one with the Babel presets. Oh, I'm in another window over here. Babel preset env. Here we go. So I'm going to copy this, but actually I'm not going to use all this because I don't even need all this. I don't need to use built-ins. What I do need is, I believe it's modules, and I'm going to say false. Is that right? I think so. Yes, modules false for the env. I believe that's how I do it. If I didn't do that right, we'll find out with an error when I do the build. So that's pretty much it. I just have the Babel preset, environment, env here, modules as false. Okay. You also notice that my browser list is set up for the last one Chrome version, last one Firefox, last one Safari. You could also do some tweaks in here for production. It'll add a few kilobytes of code to your used JavaScript. Maybe like 2 or 3 kilobytes. I can't remember anymore, but that's not a whole lot. If you try and target like the top 2%, but you don't include Opera and a couple other things like that, you can play with this a bit. But this one, if I just go with the last one version for the major browsers, I was fine. All right, so that's what the Babel Loader is going to handle all that for me. We're not worried about CSS optimization at all. Okay, so here's where the fun stuff comes in using the ArcGIS Webpack plugin. So I use it like normal. There's a new option for the plugin to not copy the assets for you, because it used to be that that was the only reason you'd want to use the plugin is to copy the assets. Well, with the latest release, what I did is I added this option here because I want to continue using the assets from the CDN, but I want to use this other feature that the ArcGIS plugin provides as well, and that is to remove modules that it can that have to do with 3D, because I'm not using 3D at the moment. So you can remove those modules from the build. That means that like the stars file won't get copied over, and a couple other things aren't going to get copied over in the build folder. Also has this user-defined exclude. So I played with this a bit, and there wasn't... Basically, you can turn off layers. So any layer that I'm not using, I can exclude from the build. So this is going to minimize... Well, it doesn't remove a whole lot. I think I might have saved a... I have to double check. I might have saved like a megabyte of deployed JavaScript when I do this, right? Remove all these layers from the deployed folder. So they're just going to get ignored. Widgets don't matter. Someone was asking me, well, why can't I just add all the widgets I don't want to use in the app? The Webpack and all the other build tools are smart enough to know that if I don't use the editor widget, it's not going to deploy any code for the editor widget. Nothing else depends on it. There's no part of the API that depends on widgets. The only ones that do depend on widgets are going to be the view, because it needs the attribution. Don't remove attribution widget. And it needs navigation widgets, right? The zoom and stuff like that. In 3D, compass is default and stuff. So, yeah, I think it's default. I don't know. Maybe not. Anyway, those are the only things you don't need. One thing I do is my app does not require any authentication. So I can ignore everything under ArcGIS Core Identify. It means I don't load it. You do this. Oh, my alarm. Sorry. If you do this, one thing you do need to do is you need to import ArcGIS Core config and do config.request.useIdentity equals false. You're basically telling the API now at this point that there's no authentication needed for your application. We are not going to load Identity Manager, and we're not going to try and handle any authentication. So if you know for sure everything you're working with is public, you can do this. If you're using like, I think you'll be okay if you're using API keys. They'll just get passed along. I don't think Identity Manager is needed for that. I could be wrong, but I might be right. You never know. So give that a shot, right? So that's one thing you need to consider as well. And that was pretty much it. So now if I do a, let's try and do a build here. Cross your fingers I did this right. npm run build. Hope my Webpack, my Babel RC is right. We'll find out in a second. I swear that's right. You're going to get these warnings. Please don't ask me about the warnings. I can't control them. They're in Babel. You could set there is a flag you can pass to something to tell Babel not to do this. It's basically just a warning saying it hit a file that was 500 kilobytes, so it's going to do some de-optimizing of the style of the code, right? When it does its optimizations, whatever it's going to do, right? So, okay, so yeah, 1.45 megabytes for the index point. That's what I typically get. So I use, to really test these out, npx serve, and this is in a dist folder, luckily. Serve dist, right? So I'm going to copy that here, and I've already got this ready to go here. So, okay, so let's go to Network tab. Let's, oops. Okay, so let's go ahead and do JavaScript files. Let's do a fresh load on this page and see how much JavaScript we get. 707 kilobytes, right, of JavaScript. And this is gzipped. That's why I like to use serve, because it'll do compression by default for you. So that is gzipped JavaScript resources. 23 JavaScript files were loaded, right? So there's 23 chunks in there. That includes the entry point for index.js. Which is good. That's pretty solid, and that loaded pretty fast for us. If I refresh it, right, loads up pretty quick. Now again, I'm not doing any optimization PWA style, so there's no service workers in here or any other little tweaks like that. This is just straight up what a typical user is probably going to do to make their build, right? So there's no errors or warnings in the console. We're good to go. So 707 kilobytes. Well, I mean, now that the stuff is cached, it's 2.1 kilobytes. But that's not bad. And that is about as good as I was able to get for this particular application, right? If I remove like this legend widget and stuff, I could probably shave off a few more. But considering that we're doing some pretty nice visualizations with the dot density render and some other stuff like that, not bad at all, right? But again, I had to set up a Babel RC. I need to do this Webpack stuff in here. There might be handful of other files I could ignore in the API build, but I mean, it's not really necessary to do. I don't think so. I think just the layers are like the main ones you want to ignore. As you can see, I showed that you don't need to worry about removing widgets. They will not impact the build size of the app. Now let's look at that, because let's see here. How do I do that? LSLA dist. It does not tell me. LSLA dot. I thought it was going to give me a full size for the dist folder here, but it does not give me the full size. Wait, I'm going to look this up because I forgot. Bash show folder size, right? Let's see here. Don't worry about me. DU. Okay. So DU dash HS dist 6.4 megabytes. That's right. That's what I had measured it on a Mac. So yeah, that's about right. 6.4 megabytes, but that includes your application, right, and all of the different chunks. Now, I get asked why these deployed sizes are kind of big, because, for example, you're using the web map, and there's a lot of different layers in there. I mean, we're telling it to ignore most of them, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in here where it's going to create these chunks based on what you might need for your application. We do a lot of dynamic loading of modules in the API. It's not just layers, but there's other stuff as well. It has to do with portal and everything else. But based on what you might need, we're going to load this. So chunks get created for those because Webpack sees that there's dynamic loading going on, and it's going to go and create chunks for that. That's where you get all those different chunks in those files. Now, remember, before the ESM builds, the deployed size for your application would be pushing close to like 300 megabytes sometimes, really depending on what you were doing, right? Because we included all the Dojo stuff, the dgrid, dstore, and all that other stuff that you might need at some point, which we don't use any of that anymore, so you don't need it, right? So we're down to 6.4 megabytes versus 300 megabytes just like, maybe 2 years ago or so. So I think that is pretty damn good, right? So, like I said, if you want to get into the weeds in Webpack, you can play with the optimizations that Webpack offers, but in my opinion and my experience, it's going to have very little impact. That is just what I'm telling you right now, and I've done a lot. Maybe if you want to do a custom compiler kind of thing, mess with Cursor a bit or something, but I'm telling you, I just didn't see much of a difference. And it was a lot of work, right? I mean, it's a lot of experimenting, troubleshooting, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, because you'll get something you think works that looks awesome because, oh, I was able to get the file sizes down magic, amazing. You load the app and it doesn't work. Right? Something is null of some object or something, right? You over optimized. Something went wrong. But okay, so now let's take a look at Vite. Vite is nice. And I need to tell you, I'm a big fan of Vite these days in terms of getting an app up and running and building it. I do not have a Vite config. I could add a Vite config if I wanted to do some stuff, right? Vite is just super fast. Lightning fast HMR, and I can attest to that because it's all ESM under the hood. The JavaScript API is ESM. So when you're in dev mode, your watching for file changes is super fast. It's ridiculous. There's also this repo for awesome Vite plugins, right? So you can go ahead and try some of these plugins out if you want to. I have not played with many of these plugins because I haven't really had a need for it yet. I might try the PWA's one I was kind of interested in. They also have this cool SVG icons that looks kind of nice to creating sprites. So I don't know if I really need it, but I used to do sprite stuff with Flash and Flex, so I kind of feel like playing around with that a bit. But yeah, so that is something you can play with, right? So there is a Vite config, and it uses rollup under the hood to handle everything. So I was talking about before that you could set up the Vite config to use ESBuild. It's going to use Cursor by default, but you can tell it to use ESBuild. The caveat with that is that ESBuild will be faster for your production build, but you're going to sacrifice a little bit of file size, probably about, in my experience, between 0.2 to 0.4 megabytes of JavaScript loaded. Well, no, not loaded, sorry. Deployed when the app is deployed, and maybe about 25K of loaded JavaScript for when your application loads. Around there. Maybe not even that much. It might have been less than that. But you are going to sacrifice a little bit of size of your JavaScript versus build speed when using ESBuild with Vite. That is like the only difference at all. My package JSON, I mean, I did the browser list here, but honestly, I don't even know if that impacts what Vite does in its build, right? So I even tried side effects false, and it's in the Webpack build too, and that just basically tells my app that there's no side effects, so it should be a little faster, less like helpers get loaded, but it didn't really impact my app at all. This is the same JavaScript file used before, turned off the identity manager and stuff, but it's super simple. I didn't have to set up a Vite config or anything like that. So if I do a build now, and it does take a little bit, but it's kind of cool. You can see it kind of like going through everything and doing its build for production, creating its chunks and its cache and stuff. But when you're in dev mode and you used to do this stuff like that, it takes that like maybe less time than this when it does the first build. Just creates like a dictionary of all the files that you're using and stuff, like just cache. and it's ridiculously fast after that. And if you import a new module in dev mode, it does a little rebuilding of the cache, and it takes a couple more seconds than normal, but then you're good to go after that. Super ridiculously fast. You get the same warnings here that you kind of got with Webpack about the size of the file. I mean, it is what it is, right? So if I do another npx serve here, this folder, and let's see what this is going to look like, right? So if I come to my app over here, where to go? This one? Yeah, this one here. Okay, so same thing. We're showing JavaScript. I'm going to do a fresh reload here, and we are actually going to load 712 kilobytes using Vite versus 707 kilobytes using Webpack. But I have no config. Now, I don't know about you, but I am willing to go ahead and sacrifice 5 kilobytes of JavaScript if I don't have to worry about setting up a Webpack config to really optimize my build, right? If I have to tell it, do not include these layers, blah, 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 you're good to go. Now, to be fair though, those layers would never get loaded in the app anyway, using Webpack either. This was removed here just to lower the amount of deployed JavaScript. So that 6.4 megabyte folder would be a little bit bigger because these files, chunks for these will also be included. So to be fair, that doesn't really impact application runtime or anything like that, right? So yeah, 707 kilobytes. I am loading more JavaScript files though, because it's Vite is full on like ESM and modules, and it takes full advantage of that as it can. It just creates more bundles for me, right? So I'm loading 64 JavaScript files versus I think it was 24 with Webpack. So there is that sacrifice as well. But with like a HTTP2 and stuff like that, I mean, you know, HTTP2 isn't all that great. I think as well, it is cool, but I don't think it's as great as a lot of us were hoping it would be. But it's still pretty cool. So H2 is going to help with this loading multiple files. It's still super fast, and basically you're going to have this all gzipped, and hopefully you're using something like Cloudflare or CloudFront or something like that to go ahead and run these behind the CDN as well to cache and speed all that stuff up, right? But again, I didn't make a config for Vite, so in my opinion, I just think it's a better choice, right? For basic apps. Now, if you really need to squeeze out the last kilobyte of size from runtime for your application, then yeah, maybe you want to go Webpack and you want to start tweaking things. Let's check the size of this folder again here. 7.4 megabytes. So yeah, so like since I'm not telling it to remove files, I gained like a megabyte there. So that's those layers I told Webpack to remove pretty much. I don't know what kind of overhead Vite has in its like loaders, like when it does stuff, or it has like a cache or anything like that, and I'm not too familiar with how it builds stuff out. But like Webpack has that, like Webpack require or whatnot that it does. Yeah, I don't know what the overhead for Vite is though, so I imagine it's very minimal. So that's no way it's that 1 megabyte Vite related. It's just the API stuff I told Webpack to remove. So if deployed build size is super important to you, like you're limited to under 7 megabytes for like this app, then yeah, maybe you want to go with Webpack to really minimize that. Now it is possible that I could use one of these awesome Vite plugins, or I could write my own plugin for Vite that would allow me to do the same kind of thing I'm doing over here to ignore these files. But I don't know yet. I haven't dug that deep because I just haven't had to, because I'm telling you right now, I don't use Webpack unless I have to anymore. Honestly, I don't. I just use Vite to get it done. There's Vite for React, there's Vite for Vue, Vite for Vanilla.js, Vite for, I think there's Vite for Svelte. I can't remember anymore. You'll see the options when you go and try to create a Vite app from a template. But yeah, so in terms of builds, that's pretty much all I got. Like I said, I get asked this question a lot, so I just wanted to cover it. For the work I put into it, I think Vite.js is my choice for build tools. If you really need to optimize your app, and maybe you're already using Webpack for your application, then yeah, you can start using the Webpack ArcGIS Webpack plugin. play around with this user-defined excludes, turn off 3D stuff, tell it not to copy the assets for you, just stick with the assets via the CDN, and you're good to go. You can play around with turning off Identity Manager if you know you're not going to need it, like you really don't need it, right? Just be aware if like you're using a layer that somebody goes ahead and makes it private, then you don't have Identity Manager on, you're stuck. Like I don't even know what's gonna happen. I think you're just gonna get an error that you can't access the layer. Identity Manager won't even kick in at that point. But yeah, that is it. You're good to go. I mean, really, if you guys have any questions, or you folks, I'm sorry, have any questions you want to ask me about this kind of stuff, please feel free. I'm always answering questions. It doesn't have to be a conference or anything like that for hitting me up. You can find me on Twitter anytime. You can ask questions on YouTube. I do respond to most of the questions on YouTube that I can. I got people asking questions from videos I made like 2 years ago or something. So I do try to respond to all of those as I can. So go ahead and hit me up anytime you want. If you need to contact me, I'm not that hard to get a hold of. So, and let me know if you want me to cover anything in particular, right? Like I said, this build stuff came out of just questions from UC recently and stuff that I had, and a couple emails that involved builds. So I thought I would just kind of cover some of that. So again, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It'll really help things out. Appreciate it. And, have a great day.